What's up guys, Kyle here again, and today we're gonna check out the Peavey Transtube Supreme. Let's do it! Alright guys, hope you're doing great out there. Today, as I said, we are checking out the Peavey Transtube Supreme. This is a classic high gain solid state amplifier that really has been overlooked for a long time. Peavey's solid state stuff is kind of finally starting to gain a little bit more of a reputation in recent years for actually being good. I've often heard the Peavey Bandit and the Peavey Supreme line as being described as the best worst amps you could buy. So the way that I take that is they've always just been kind of considered these cheap, crappy solid state amps that Peavey put out in the 80s and 90s to kind of appease the budget market, especially when solid state was kind of starting to become more popular. And they just, Peavey for the longest time just never had a great reputation. So in the last 10 to 15 years, people have really caught on to how good a lot of the old Peavey tube stuff is. And that trend is kind of continuing over into their solid state stuff. I actually really think that this is a great sounding amp. Now I've heard a lot of people use this thing and sound really bad with it. And honestly, for me, it was not the easiest to dial in because there are some spiky frequencies and there is a little bit of that solid state hollowness that comes along with a lot of solid state high gain amps from the 80s and 90s. So you can dial that stuff out for the most part. The high end on this amp is really where I kind of struggle. It's almost a little bit too spiky in the top end, no matter where you have it set. Now, I've not used this amp in a band context, so I'm not sure if those high-end frequencies would be good to cut through or if they would kind of be clashing with like the cymbals. But either way, I kind of have it dialed in a way that I find pleasing in the room. It's super punchy on the low end. It actually takes a boost fairly well, depending on how you dial the boost in. But yeah, there's a lot of good tones. There's some cool features built into this amp. And for an amp that you can get for 200 bucks all day long, sometimes less, these things, I used to see these things up for like $80 to $100 on Craigslist and they would sit. And now people are kind of finding out that they're a great value for the money. So they're selling at a higher price and they're selling a lot faster. But anyways, I think it's a cool amp and I wanted to shine a little bit of a spotlight on it. The intro clip that you heard was going through a Randall 4x12 XL cab with vintage 30s SM57 on the speaker where the dust cap meets the cone using my Schecter Apocalypse E1 guitar. And I actually had the Walrus Audio Ages overdrive on, so we're gonna turn that stuff off. I'm gonna put everything back to noon. There's a couple interesting features on here. We've got an increased gain switch and a thrash switch. I will show you what both of those do. We're gonna pull both of them out of the circuit for now. This amp obviously also has a really clean channel because it's a solid state amp and solid state cleans tend to sound pretty good. We're not gonna go there because this is Belligerent Amateur Central and that's not what we do. But anyways, also over here, you've got presence, which is kind of unique to some solid state amplifiers. In my experience anyways, you don't find a lot of solid state amps that have a presence pot. And over here you have the tube dynamics. So the lower you turn this down, the less it's supposed to emulate a tube. The higher you turn it up, the more it's supposed to emulate a tube. At least that's the way I understand it. John Fields, if you're watching this, sir, you can correct me. You've got a resonance switch here and an effects level switch here. I will play with the resonance switch. The effects level I will leave out because I will not be using the effects loop. What really kind of sets the Transtube stuff apart and the Supreme line in general is that there is actually like, I forget how John at Peavey actually described it to me, but it's almost like this amp has a tube type transformer in it because it's a solid state amp, but it reacts differently to different ohm settings, and this actually has an ohm switch on it, much like you would find on a tube amp. So right now we're in a 16 ohm cab. If I were to put this on an 8 ohm cab, it might sound different. It might react a little bit differently, much like a tube amp does through 16 and 8 ohms. They do react differently with different impedance curves. So keep that in mind. That's something unique to Peavey. So I'm gonna go ahead, I'm gonna turn this on. We've got the power tube dynamics all the way up. I'm gonna put the presence back down. Resonance is out. Everything across the board is at noon. Gain switches are out. And pre-gain is at 1. So let's see how this thing sounds. Real quick, before we do that, if this is your first time here at my channel, what I do is I take awesome high gain amps, cabs, overdrives, pickups, I record them with a simple SM57 setup, and I give you guys the unprocessed audio on your end. So if you like E standard thrash riffs and guys who do not know how to play above the 8th fret, you're in the right place. Consider hitting the like button and subscribing to this video on your way out. I'd appreciate it. Okay guys, let's hear how this thing sounds. It is literally a clean channel at this point. So let's pump that gain up. We've got some nice scratchies going on because this thing is old. Okay, let's bump that up even more. We need some gain because this is basically just a clean channel at this point. All right, that is harsh. That is very harsh. We're gonna turn that presence down actually. All right, that's a little bit more bearable. Now the gain is starting to come on. That sounds pretty good, honestly. Let's kick that gain up just a little bit more to 3 o'clock. Not bad at all. It is a little bit boxy, a little bit sterile, but it's definitely not terrible. Let's turn the lows up. Let's turn the highs back a little bit and the mids back a little bit. Now, we need that presence back. Gain all the way up. Got a nice punchy sound going on. It is a little bit kind of dull sounding. It's a little bit on the boxy side. Very punchy in the low end. Let's turn that resonance on to see if we can fill that low out a little bit more. I'm almost overloading the mic. That's a ton of low end punch. Let's roll the lows back on the amp. All right, so yeah, that's super punchy on the low end. We can probably get some highs back in on that. That doesn't sound bad to me at all, guys. Again, it's a little bit boxy, but the Ultra series, which these amps are kind of somewhat modeled after as far as I am aware of, tends to be a little bit boxy in the mids too. So really, that's not a surprise. It sounds familiar to my ears as somebody who has played the Ultra Plus extensively. Let's kick on boost and see how that sounds. I'm gonna kick that Walrus audio back in because that's actually sounded really good to me. I'm having a really hard time talking today. All right, so that sounds okay. It's really boxy in the mids. It's very, very like wah 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 wah. I don't know. There's just some weird low mid frequencies there. It's super punchy and everything, but it's hard to dial the highs in to get them to a point where they're balanced without being overly spiky or overly muffled. And then with the mids, it's like they're kind of centered in a place where if you dial them up, it just makes the mids, instead of being like a Marshall upper mid type of spike, it just kind of makes them sound even more boxy. So we're going to dial the gain back down. We're going to kick the gain switch in. We're going to turn that boost off. All right, so that's what we have with the gain down. That pot needs some love. I apologize. Gain is at noon now. Honestly, the string clarity and everything on this amp is really surprising. It sounds really good like that. Nice and chimey on the top end. Let's actually take a little bit of that presence out. All right, so let's pull that gain up even more. We're now at 3 o'clock. All right, so very punchy on the low end, a little bit boxy sounding, just like it was before. Let's get a little bit more high end on the actual EQ. Honestly, for a thrash band, that's killer because the lows are so punchy and percussive. It's kind of insane. As of right now, I'm going to dial the gain back a little bit. I'm going to dial the lows back a little bit. All right, still a little bit harsh on the top end. I'm gonna bring the presence back up a little bit, bring the highs back down a little bit. Now, we're gonna play with the power percentage knob a little bit. Let's pull that back to 50% and see how much of a difference that makes. Okay, so that actually seems to calm the frequencies that are poking out a little bit too much. Calms them down quite a bit, actually. It makes the highs a little bit more soft on the ears, but yet doesn't make the amp sound particularly muffled. It also kind of calms down that ultra punchy low end bass that we have going on. So let's dial the lows up just a tad. Let's dial the mids up just a tad. All right, so now we are a little muffled. Let's dial that resonance up. Presence. Honestly, that sounds really good. That's nice and balanced. All right, so I am noticing that the saturation on this amp, with the settings as they are, everything's pretty much at noon, by the way, are very dry. When you kick in the thrash button, we're gonna turn the gain down because that adds some gain, it adds some saturation, and it also kind of scoops the mids out a little bit. All right, so let's turn the gain up to 1 o'clock. All right, so we're sounding a little hollow in the mids. Let's turn those mids up and not the highs as I'm doing, the mids. Okay guys, real quick, I'm gonna grab a guitar and play a couple drop C riffs. All right guys, I now have my Gibson Les Paul Studio with the stock 498T bridge pickup. We are in drop C, and I'm gonna play a drop C riff. All right, so it sounds a little bit better because some of those high-end frequencies are kind of pulled back a little bit in a lower tuning. Let's kick out the thrash button again, and let's kick in that overdrive one more time and see how well this amp does like that. Super MIDI. As you can tell, I'm fighting making the smallest adjustments, trying to really level this thing out. So, all right, last riff of the day, guys. Okay guys, that's gonna do it for me today. What did you think about the Peavey Transtube Supreme? Do you think that it is a sleeper amp that should be rising in value and coveted among collectors, or do you think that it's just another solid state amp? I personally found some settings I really enjoyed on it, and I think that it's an amp that I would have to pair with the right cabinet and the right pickup in order to kind of balance everything out just right. But overall, I don't think it's bad by any means. There are other amps that I would choose before it, but I'm sure that I could get some great tones out of this thing with a little bit of experimenting, maybe even an EQ in the loop, and that's all it would take. So hope that you guys found this video helpful. Let me know what you thought down in the comments. If you liked it, please hit the like button on your way out. Consider subscribing so you don't miss the next one. Kyle here again. We'll see you next time.